Welcome to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And I'm very humbled to have our guest today here with us. Acharya Shunya is a wisdom teacher and a catalyst for empowering health and elevating consciousness worldwide. She is an award-winning and internationally renowned author, speaker, and scholar of non-dual wisdom, Advaita, and a classically trained master of yoga and Ayurveda. She is the first female head of her 2,000-year-old Indian Vedic spiritual lineage, is the president of the Awakened Self Foundation with its international headquarters in California, and the founder of the spiritual and philanthropic nonprofit Vedika Global. Her top-rated Shadow to Self podcast, award-winning Alchemy with Ayurveda program, and her signature offerings currently unfold on the theme of sovereign life and are creating shifts in consciousness and improving health. Acharya Shunya is the author of the best-selling book, Ayurveda Lifestyle Wisdom, a complete prescription to optimize your health, prevent disease, live with vitality and joy. And her second book is Sovereign Self, Claim Your Inner Joy and Freedom with Empowering Wisdom of the Vedas, Upanishads, and Bhagavad Gita. A sought-after speaker, Acharya Shunya leads workshops and global retreats and delivers keynote addresses at universities and conferences, including UCSF, UCLA, Berkeley University, Stanford, Kripalu, 1400.org, Shivananda Ashrams, World Ayurvedic Congress, and the National Ayurvedic Medical Association, NAMA. She is an advisor to many noteworthy national and international organizations, including the government of India. She has served as president of the California Association of Ayurvedic Medicine for 2 consecutive terms and is the founding director of Yoga Unify, a new nonprofit preserving the tradition and stewarding the forward evolution of yoga. In 2015, she was recognized as one of the top trailblazers of Ayurveda and yoga in America by Spirituality and Health magazine. And in 2016, the California Institute of Integral Studies honored Acharya Shunya with a Distinguished Service Award. She received the Nalanda Award of Excellence in Ayurvedic Education by the Association of Ayurvedic Professionals in North America in 2010 and the Global Women's Power Award in 2015. She lives in Northern California with her husband and son. That was a very long introduction, but I think it really speaks to the incredible amount of work and focus that you've had for your mission. So we thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
So let's jump right in. What is the sovereign self?
We all have a propensity to be truly sovereign, to source our power, our authority, our happiness from within. And that dimension of our existence is known as self. And this self is not just an abstract word, but it is a pure presence, a true noun, a true existence that the ancient teachers from India call Atma. Atma literally means Apanoti sarvamiti atma, that which is boundless within you. So on a day-to-day basis, we feel kind of constrained and limited and frustrated and exhausted, but we all know that if we were to close our eyes, take a deep breath and go somewhere inside, we're there. We touch something boundless and come back feeling, wow, what a great yoga class, what a great yoga teacher. And we give all our compliments to whoever helped us go inside. But who did we meet inside? What did we touch inside? What did we experience from the inside? That is the sovereign self. And that's what I like to talk about and lead people to.
And so the sovereign self is often covered, though. It's often hidden. And it's hidden by our shadows, by our illusions. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It is said that this Atma, or this sovereign self, lives in the cave, Guhya. Guhyartha Atma. It lives in the heart. So that when it lives in the cave of the heart, so it's not just the ordinary heart that's pumping blood, but there is a mystical cave in the heart chakra or in the heart field. And when you talk about the word cave, it means, one, it's hidden. You need knowledge to find where the cave is to go exploring. Mm-hmm. Cave is typically dark due to our own ignorance, our own illusions, projections, and creations of the mind. So there's darkness there. That means we need the lamp of knowledge, which I like to share in my book, which teachers in our tradition share historically for thousands of years. And then through that lamp of knowledge, we'll find the cave, we'll go inside and we'll be like, whoa, we'll find all this light inside us. And then we'll realize there was no cave, no darkness. We were just having an episode of forgetfulness. We really are those amazing beings. We were just leading very small lives, very petty lives.
Yeah.
And on recognition of our greater nature, the Vedas, the ancient scriptures from India say, all will be well. It's like a nightmare is over and you've woken up from it.
And so it's interesting you talk about that cave, finding that cave, because that is the process of our lives, yes, where we can feel like we lose the way, we can feel like we don't know where we're going, but ultimately the destination lies at the other side of the darkness. Is that
So
right?
true. So well said. And it's very symbolic. A lot of the language in the ancient texts of India is very symbolic and poetic.
I was just telling you before we started, but I'll say it openly on the podcast, that we were connected through a mutual friend, and that I was very excited to interview you. And then your publisher was kind enough to send your book, The Sovereign Self. And so then I read it, and then I felt shy, because it is truly a remarkable description of this process, this thing that all of us are walking through, that all of humanity walks through. You talk about let the rubbing of the shadows awaken us to what is beyond. So just all of the imagery makes it so clear and so accessible. These are things that we know and experience in our daily life, going through a dark tunnel, finding the light on the other side. And then, of course, there's that joke, is it the light of the day or is it the light of the oncoming train coming at us? There are ways that we sometimes find even deeper distress. Can you speak a little bit to the 7 stages of blind and desire, the fall from consciousness to unconsciousness, how this happens for us?
Our senses go running here and there in the melee of life. And that's fine. It's fine to have preferences and delights. But what happens is it becomes likes and dislikes. We develop an egotistic preference. And pretty soon we're ready to defend them. So they become aversions and attractions. And that's a slippery slope. Because when our attachments, what we become attached to, is not met, it could be a thing, it could be a person, it could be a circumstance, we become angry. And this anger is like a fool's anger. Instead of accepting life as is, like there's been a whole orchestration of situations for us to be in this moment facing whatever loss or betrayal or difficulty or challenge. We start bellowing with anger and rage. We're angry with everybody. We want to blame somebody, even God. And then this next stage from anger is self pity or grief. And we go into this place where we are, sometimes we feel grief first and then anger. Sometimes we feel anger first and then grief. So, but they are both mutually supportive. That's what I want to say. So somebody may feel self pity and then become angry. Somebody may feel angry and then feel like a victim. So these stages happen. And after that, when anger and self pity have rocked our reality, and a delusionary state of being is born. And in this delusionary state, we feel very entitled, we feel peeved, we feel like us against them, me against the world. I'm unlucky or I'm a loser or everybody's, out to get me. So we have our own convictions and feelings and suspicions. And we are not doing a reality check anymore. And that's called a delusory state. And a lot of us live in that delusory state. We live, we marry, we make love, we raise babies, we go to church or temple, and we even become spiritual teachers at time in that delusory state. So this is really a normal abnormal. And after this delusory state, what follows is when it becomes more chronic, it leads to what is known as memory loss. Now, this is not like Alzheimer's, a neurological memory loss, which is benign in that sense. It's not benign, it's traumatic, but it's benign because we're not causing it. But in the kind of spiritual memory loss, we've caused it. And now we become so estranged from anything deeper or true or authentic or real beyond our mental projections that we have no memory of what was the reality. Am I really such a irritated, frustrated, broken loser person, or is there something innocent and fine and true still within me? So we forget, and in this memory loss, we even forget what books we've read, what teachers have told us, what our elders have role modeled for us. We're unhelpable at this stage. Sometimes, if I receive a student who's at this stage of memory loss, I worry about taking on such a student because they can't remember anything that is filled with light. They have their own self fulfilling prophecies, which they make come true. And the final stage is the stage of emotional and even physiological collapse. We may be going about life being, famous or rock stars in our own professions, but internally we are broken. Internally we are empty and hollow, and we are really scared, though we may be putting on bravados. So this seven staged movement from a simple desire, can I marry this person, or I'd love to have a child, though I've not been able to conceive, or I'd love to live in such an beautiful house in this neighborhood, could lead all the way to emotional instability and spiritual hollowness, was the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, which I have put forth with examples and simpleness, so that we can really live the knowledge, not just memorize it or hear it.
Understanding, pulling away those cobwebs of confusion can be so difficult in a daily life when we are diapering babies and washing clothes and cooking food and running for the bus. How do we find spirituality as householders? How do we find peace within what Zorba the Greek calls, the whole catastrophe? Or Esther Perel wrote a book called Mating in Captivity. She talks about the paradoxical union of domesticity and sexual desire. So how do we find spirituality as householders? Why does it not require going away from everything in order to find this peace?
I think let me begin with that. Like, you don't need to go away, because going away is not going to help you really look at what you need to look at. In fact, according to the most ancient spiritual tradition coming out of India, which is the Vedas, which is the fountainhead of Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, and maybe like 1,000 more smaller religions from India. Somehow, much later in India, everybody became fascinated with a journey away from the world, away from the family, away from your sexuality, away from your reality. And the Buddha is a beautiful personification of that, a romantic journey of the hero away from the world, living under the tree. But the general tradition in India has always been about a very embodied spirituality. Krishna is considered an avatar and the teacher of the Gita. He was much married, and the disciple Arjuna, to whom he gives the gospel of the Gita, had a couple of wives. And all the rishis who wrote the Ayurveda, Yoga, Vedanta, Vedic texts were often much married, had love interest, maybe had more than one love interest. This was all a part and parcel of our life, our sexuality, our romance, our raising our children, our basic needs. In fact, when we deny them, according to Ayurveda, one of the great teachers, Ashtanga Hridayam, who wrote the Ashtanga Hridayam, he says it gives birth to perversions of the mind when we deny our sexuality and our sensuality. And moderation and dharma and the consideration of how much is enough is much more better than banning it or denying it altogether. Repression and suppression breeds permissiveness or perversion or distortion, for sure, in our understanding of these basic drives. And as a person who is fully integrated with Ayurveda and neurology, you will understand how practical and how sensible was this recommendation of the sages to never leave the world. In fact, my guru Baba, he took off in his younger days to the Himalayas for 4 years, and there was a part of him that didn't want to come back, but he got the message from his father, who was also a sage, my great grandfather, who said, come back in the world, take on a family, and let me see if you can find the Himalaya within you. So it's while you're raising your babies, it was while I was raising my son, while I was being a soccer mom, while I was walking my dogs, my dog, my lab, and my German, and the ego struggles that I experienced with my partner, the fears that I experienced at night of losing my loved ones, and then looking at all of that and saying, is this even real? Is this fear coming from attachment, or is this fear coming from a normal place within me? It was really through all of this that I found something abidingly beautiful and sovereign within me. So we humans have gifted ourselves some kind of a fantasy
Mm,
about leaving the world to find the other world.
mhm,
There have been some people who've done this journey, so I'm not going to throw it away, but I might say it may not be for most of us. At least we should have the option of being householders on this planet. And you don't have to be married with kids to be a householder as long as you're part and parcel of the world and its life amongst other people. Uh,
mhm,
you are a householder, you have a house here, and you are dependent on others for your living.
mm,
And tend to find our spirituality. And the Vedic spirituality was a householder spirituality, and the monastic path was open, but really understood that it's for the rare few, the curious few,
mhm,
not for all of us. That's why I, as a teacher, as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, as a householder, and as a lineage holder, I think I could have avoided talking about these things, but I did in the Sovereign Self, because so many of us think that walking the path of the Bhagavad Gita or yoga, it demands too much from us and it should be a feast of famine situation.
mhm,
Either I should be living by myself alone on some island meditating or nothing. But
mhm.
that's not true. And we have to bring a consideration of, am I in bondage of my attachments, or am I sovereign right now in the middle of lovemaking or child rearing or going to work? That's what I would say.
What is the role of women in this tradition? Can we get a sneak peek at your new book coming out next January to be called Roar Like a Goddess, Every Woman's Guide to Unapologetic Power, Propensity, and Purpose?
Women have a huge role. In fact, I'm so delighted to share with our listeners that the Vedas themselves were authored by 27 women seers, perhaps the only holy scripture in the world which has not just been authored by men,
Mm.
but women too. And these women have gone to town in the Vedas, and they've talked about their romantic yearnings, they've talked about their childbearing, they've talked about their complete being as a channel to divinity. And in fact, in the last chapter of my book, Sovereign Self, I've quoted this Rishika, or they were known as Rishikas, this woman seer from 10,000 years ago, who talks about the immensity of her being because of an acknowledgement of her own divine feminine power.
Mm.
So this is a part of history that cannot be denied, but it was forgotten. Though India has progressive roots in the Vedas, the popular Hinduism today and the popular religions today do not represent that progressive originality of the Vedic seers. And slowly, the India I grew up in was
Mm.
highly patriarchal. Now,
Mm.
my family was progressive because we are Vedic folks. We are strange people, where
Mm.
I didn't even realize I'm a woman until I left my house, took on a partner. And then I realized, oh my God, it doesn't matter what Vedas I know. It doesn't matter what lineage I come from. All that matters is my sexual organs. That's it. My gender matters.
Mhm.
And so I've gone through my own experience. And then when I came to America, I realized, oh, American women, Western women are as much under the yoke of patriarchy as we Eastern women are.
Mhm.
I mean, the way it happens changes,
Mhm.
and the languaging may change, but it's the message is still the same, that you're a second class citizen on the planet. So while I'm a non-dual teacher, and the Bhagavad Gita itself says that pure consciousness, which is the self, is not dependent on the body, and here's a beautiful verse where it says, whether it's in a male body, a female body, or a mixed gender body. So it's a recognition of homosexuality and transgender right there. The
Mhm.
consciousness is the same. So that's what the Gita says. But gradually it became so gender unequal
Mhm.
that I had to write this book. And I'm a worshiper of the divine feminine, of the goddess Durga. And I saw how the myths of the goddess too had been reinterpreted by the pundits.
Mm.
And gradually, a very domesticated version of the goddesses was being fed to us. When in reality, the goddesses were out of box principles. These archetypes can teach anyone, not just women, but people of color, people of mixed gender, people for any reason they have been marginalized. If they were to read my book, Sovereign Self and Roar Like a Goddess, I think their life would change because my life changed. I've
Mhm.
not written this from an intellectual place. I've written my books from my own accomplishments, from my own powerlessness to power journey,
Mm.
darkness to light, and feeling second class to experiencing my inner royalty. And so these books have history, mythology, research, scriptures, all of that in it because I didn't want it just to be one woman's blabbering. I wanted to connect these positions with the Vedic scriptures because that's what I'm a scholar of. And I think the goddess book is ticklingly empowering, really. When I read it, I start roaring.
I cannot wait. And so, how do we think? What is the right way to think about oppression, identity oppressions like sexism or homophobia or racism? How do we put that into our mind where we don't just turn to our sovereign self and accept it or try to make no change, but we also don't develop such anger or aggression around it that we act in ways that are not helpful to the movement?
The only answer I can say is that the permanent solution will come from knowledge of the self because the self is non dual. We may share different bodies, different genders, different minds, different stories, but when we go to sleep, in our deep sleep, we all return to the common womb, and that common move is that one self.
Mm, mm,
So in the Rig Veda, 10,000 years ago, there is a declaration, Ekam Satvipraha Bahuda Vadanti, which literally means there is only one truth. You may describe it by any name, know it by any name.
mhm,
There is only one truth, and come back to that truth. And that one truth is the self. And so the more I'm doing my part, Gillian, by sharing about this self, because the more we become fall in love with our own true being, we'll recognize that this true being is shining in the butterfly, in
mhm,
the person across the street who may be from a different country, culture, or race.
mhm,
And so, for all these reasons, I feel that it is our ignorance that leads to separation. It is our believing that I am the body, I am the mind, that leads to this wrong identity, breeds separation and suspicion and mistrust of each other.
mm,
But spiritual knowledge that I am the self, which I share with all beings, all creatures, that will bring union and that will bring compassion and that will birth dharma or the conscious way of life and relating and engaging with each other. That's
mm,
why I'm a woman on fire. I am trying to write books about these things. And even in my podcast, I have a dedicated episode on George Floyd. I'm about to record a podcast on violence against Asians right now. So I try
mhm,
to be an activist
mhm,
too, in the sense of connecting my ancient lineage knowledge to what is happening in the era in which my avatar is moving around
mhm,
and not
mhm.
just isolating them in boxes.
You talk about this in many places in your book. Finding our sovereign self is not outside the world, as you've already talked about, but inside, in the place and time that we are at. You talk about, there's a great story that you tell about the competitive king between Vishwamitra and Vashishta,
Yes.
and how one spiritual seeker was jealous of another spiritual seeker. And so the first one did everything in his power to continue to awaken and enlighten and let go, but he could not let go finally of the jealousy of what he considered his competitor. Would you like to tell the story or tell the moral of the story?
Yeah, this is a Vashishta is incidentally is the lineage head, the rishi head of my lineage.
Mm,
And he was known as a Brahma rishi or an awakened rishi. He was a complete knowledgeable seer of the Vedas. And he had a cow, and the cow apparently was a magical cow.
mhm,
And one night, a neighboring king was passing by and stopped at the ashram or the home of Vashishta to give his army a break and to take some rest. And he wondered how the poor rishi would feed him. He was poor materially, but rich spiritually. So he just told the cow, and the cow gave enough milk and enough food and everything. Somehow magically there was something for everyone to eat. And so the king now wanted that cow. He realized that this rishi is no ordinary rishi because he has this amazing cow. He wanted that cow. He asked for the cow like, like an entitled, demanding king. And Vashishta just shook his head and said, sorry, this cow belongs here, because he knew that she needs to be in a spiritually pure vibration. But then he got really, really mad and he tried to fight wars to get that cow, but the cow had so much power that he couldn't win. So then he decided from ego, I'm going to become spiritually ascended. I'll get my own cow. You know how we all do that.
Mm-hmm.
Not from a place that we set out on our spiritual journey, but from a place of incompletion. And he had those moments when he rose in his spiritual vibration, but then he would get distracted by lust or by sycophancy or something or the other, and he'd lose his power. And then gradually he kept coming back and he kept meditating and he kept trying to gain his spiritual power. And finally, everybody was saying, wow, look at this king, Vishwamitra. He has become a seer now. But he heard everybody say good things about him, but he wanted that guy, Vashishta, to acknowledge. So he went to Vashishta's home and he said, do you agree that I have become, as spiritually ascended, maybe as you or something like that? And Vashishta quietly, with a lot of compassion, just nodded his head, saying, no, you are not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then they walked away, and Vashishta's wife said to him, why? Why did you not acknowledge to him? After all, he has been working for so many decades and he has grown in his being. Why can't you just say to him, why can't you just say to him that, yes, you have become a rishi, you have become a seer? Now, unknown to Vashishta and his wife, they didn't know that Vishwamitra was hiding in the dark corners just outside the room. And he had become so enraged, he almost wanted to kill Vashishta at that point. And he was like eavesdropping on the husband and wife's conversation. And then he heard Vashishta very quietly respond, I did not say that you have become what you want to become, a spiritually ascended being, because I love him.
Mm-hmm.
And on hearing this and receiving this transmission of pure love, Vashishta's ego just collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And when his ego collapsed or let go or dropped, he was already close to the light, the true light within him. The self, the sovereign self started shining.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vashishta came out and saw Vishwamitra just flowing with love and gratitude and regret that where was he with his ego? And then Vashishta said to him, oh, you have become that.
Mm-hmm.
So love was the answer. Letting go was the answer. Obsessively not pushing and demanding a label, a title was the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that sometimes people who really love us, like our teachers, our parents, our friends, may say something to us that may not be right for us, but that's for our best. So it's a very deep story. And I think the moral of it is to do the inner work and not just get caught up like Vishwamitra did in the outer demonstration of spiritual prowess, spiritual accomplishments. Look how many mantras I can chant. Look how I can memorize the Bible or the Gita and just say it. This is very nourishing to me because as 21st century people, we too get filled up with our little trips, mind trips.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we can be that when we soften into our being and not try to push it.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about that first process as spiritual bypassing, as that you describe it as or define it as the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, or unfinished developmental tasks.
Yeah, I have explained bypassing was important, Gillian, to talk about because this is what we're all doing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a trend for feel good spirituality right now.
Mm-hmm.
And in the feel good spirituality, we can learn to chant a mantra, take a couple of deep breaths, meditate 20 minutes twice a day, and we're done.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
think we're done, but the work is not done. And probably this feel good vibrations are still like a cloud. They're just temporarily covering up what is our trauma or what is our immaturity, or what is it that we have to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And we have created generations of people who have bypassed their real work, their real shadow, to create almost an apparition of somebody who's accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
And spiritual bypassing can happen both through spiritual knowledge, spiritual memorization, spiritual accomplishments, as well as material knowledge, material degrees from universities. And so we feel because I have a degree, because I went to an Ivy League before, because we've made it, but we've
Mm-hmm.
not.
Mm-hmm.
So the Vedas have very kindly pointed out to us three ways we can delude ourselves. One of them is where we think that our body has all the comforts. We have good clothes, the body has a good bed to sleep in, all is well.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the worldly way, we feel like the world recognizes us. We have a name and fame and a place to hang our hat, and people applaud us. So we've made it. And the most tragic of them is known as the spiritual delusion, where because we are familiar with some scriptures or a tradition or a path, we think that we're there, but we may not even have opened the door to the path that takes us there. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to be careful about this bypassing, and I wanted to bring that because as yogis, as Ayurveda practitioners, as Vedic teachers, I've seen it happen everywhere, and it's happened to me too in my younger days, where you feel discomfort, but then this Vedic eye that my Guru Baba gave me made me see, like, why, despite knowing everything I know, why am I still feeling this fluttering anxiety in the pit of my stomach?
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, there is some unresolved ignorance here that I'm trying to propel life in a direction rather than accepting it where it is, rather than seeing what I have to see. I'm wanting to see what my mind wants to see.
Mm-hmm.
So I use the knowledge against my own bypassing, and I'm hoping that I'm not bypassing anymore, but I always am vigilant because the ego can be sneaky.
The ego can be very sneaky.
Sneaky.
We've talked a little bit about the Vedas. Can you talk about them a little bit more openly? Because when I was initially learning Ayurveda 20 years ago, we read Shad Darshan, we looked at the different philosophies. And what I was taught was that Hinduism was the word given actually by Alexander the Greek for everything that existed east of the Indus River. I don't know if that's actually true, but that there's many different traditions. It's not just one thing. There's not one way of thinking about things. Can you talk a little bit about what is the nature of Hinduism? How can we think of this not necessarily as just one religion, but as a multivariate group of philosophies about truth?
Actually, the Vedas are not Hindu.
Aha.
This is a huge misconception
Mm-hmm.
that Vedas are Hindu. The word Hindu does not even exist in the Vedas. The correct term is Sanatana Dharma. Dharma means that which is eternal. Sanatana means that which is eternal, and Dharma means that eternal law or eternal truth. So the original teachings of the Vedas deal with the eternal truths that are universal,
Mm-hmm.
and Hinduism came much later. It is a different thing that Hinduism is greatly influenced by the Vedas.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, in Hinduism, we see that there is a tolerance for people of other faith. Hindus have never tried to convert people from other religion.
Mm-hmm.
Hindus have accepted gods of other religion
Mm-hmm.
and into their own fold,
Mm-hmm.
because it comes from that tolerance and that ahimsa, non-violence, for example, which comes from the Vedas, then traveled into Hinduism and Buddhism. People say Buddha talks about ahimsa. He gave the word ahimsa. But again, its roots are in the Vedas. It's the Vedas that go on and on about ahimsa.
Mm-hmm.
So the Vedas, you can consider them as original wisdom that converts an ordinary human being into a conscious super being, a trustee of the planet, not just an abuser and a user of the planet,
Mm-hmm.
to find the light within. these Vedas were not connected to any one deity that we know today in Hinduism, like Ganesha and Shiva and all of that. These goddesses were there, like Durga and Saraswati, but these goddesses again were more like, symbolic of the higher inspirations of the mind. So there is definitely, you can find the seeds of Hinduism, the seeds of Buddhism, the seeds of Jainism, the seeds of Sikhism in the Vedas, but the Veda itself is not a religion.
And how old are
We
the
are
Vedas?
now looking at 8 to 10,000 years ago in India was this thriving civilization known as the Saraswati civilization, and near the Saraswati River, which was thriving. And contrary to, again, wrong understanding, the Vedas were written by original people from India. These were not Aryans or the Aryan race that driven on horsebacks to India. This was written by original Indians. And these teachings then continued, and definitely they are maximally revered in the Hindu religion that came afterwards. And even that religion, that word Hindu is a Persian word, which literally means people who live on the other side of the river Sindhu. And because the Persians couldn't say sir, so they said Hindu. And gradually that word became Hindu. And then that religion came to be known as Hinduism. But if you go, so there's a popular Hinduism, but if you go into the philosophical roots of popular Hinduism, again, the scholars say we are Sanatana Dharma. We are not just a religion, an ism, but we are a way of life. So that's why in Hinduism, there is no central church or a temple or a command. There is no one author or one God. And God is found in pebbles and in wind and in air and in animals. And so it's not like they have multiple gods, but they see God everywhere. And this vision comes again from the Veda. There is only one truth. So maybe this will help. And the Vedas were then for a long time an oral body of wisdom, of knowledge. And gradually, many, many thousands of years later, it's not until a couple of 100 years ago that they were put in writing. And today the Vedas can be found on any online source worldwide. Download them. But the beauty is that they were committed to memory, and every generation was committed to memory. So we have them unchanged from 10,000 years ago. And the beauty is that from 10,000 years ago, we have Vedas. 5,000 years ago, we have Ayurveda, which is again Ayurveda. The Vedas are the parents of Ayurveda, the medicine of the Vedas. And the Ayurveda itself, Charak Samhita, its ancient text says that to become an Ayurvedic Vaidya, you must study the Vedas, because I belong to the Vedas. So all this beautiful stuff has come out of the Vedas. And look at the science, look at the philosophy, look at the lifestyle, look at the sexual freedom, look at the ethics, look at the dharma, look at the art and sculpture. So clearly the Vedas are representative not just of an ancient civilization, but a very advanced civilization, not just in technology, but in consciousness. And I'm proud to be an ambassador of those Vedas. That's why even in my goddess book, I'm having to go back from the religious interpretation of the goddess back to the Vedic reinterpretation of the god. What was the original nature of the goddesses? And what can we learn from that?
How did the Vedas look at the goddesses?
In a very unboxed way. In fact, Aditi, the original goddess, is Aditi. And she is the mother of all the male gods. And so the male gods have emerged. So the original goddess, the original divinity, is said to be feminine in the Vedas. And, we have Ardhanarishwara, we have half Shiva, half Shakti, half male, half female deity also, a hermaphrodite deity also. So, the original understanding of the Vedas, that God is beyond body, beyond gender, formless, nameless, and is dwelling in every particle of the universe and in your own being, in your own heart, in the cave. This is what is being explicitly demonstrated, that the divine feminine, the goddess, lives inside you too. And so my tendency is to say, well, if the goddess lives within me, if Durga is not just a goddess of power that I worship on my altar, but if I am Durga, then how do I reinterpret the situation in front of me where I'm afraid of confrontation? How do I deal with this situation? How do I bring my Durga power from my subconscious to my conscious mind, using neurological terms,
Mm-hmm.
to lead my life from a Durga consciousness. So that's how I like to write. And I've written about this bully that used to wait for me at school
Mm-hmm.
when I was 9 or 10, and was really afraid of her. And then we had this archetype of Durga riding like a lion. And so my gurus, had told me all these stories, and my mother too. So I imagined myself going to school, not walking, but on my lion. And all the way from home to school, I had this imagination, and I didn't know what I'm doing, that I'm creating neural pathways of imagination to create a new reality. I didn't know all that. I'm just 9 or 10-year-old. I just had this archetype, and I could feel my breath get warm by the time I had walked, like half a mile to my school, with my girlfriends chit-chatting around me, and I'm like focused on this imagination. And then when that bully met me, she saw my power, because she went away. She just took her eyes away. She couldn't meet my eyes. And she melted away. And that was my real visceral experience of like knowing your power. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to raise your voice. You just have to know who you are. And that's going to help you. And that's how I lead my life. I don't have to pick a lot of battles. I've fought the battle inside me. The goddess is me.
The goddess that is so true. So you are truly a channel for this ancient perspective of goddess through the churning of the waves and into the present moment. That our job is to find this through the story of our life. There's no point at which we finish the story up to the last breath and then beyond, but that it is a constant, we don't learn this lesson and then we're done. We learn it in every new experience, in every new moment. We get to find our way back through the darkness of the cave and into the light of sovereign self.
I would say so. And anyone who's trying to sidestep the story and create some glorious vacuum filled with light, I think they're gonna miss the rock and roll of spirituality in life. That's for sure. And I think reading my book will make people feel okay about even difficulties that they have faced in life, because right there is a gem waiting for us.
And your book really talks about, we can understand it with our mind. And I know we talked to my teacher, Dr. Vasant Lad, the Ayurvedic teacher, has often says every cell is a center of awareness. Every cell has mind, so that it's not just the things we think about in our daily life that we are thinking. It's also what our cells are perceiving, what our cells are thinking, and how they together respond.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because we can't really separate the cells of the body from the prana, from from the vital force, from the mind, from the knowingness, and from the bliss. All of this is connected. And we are this organic, integrated entity, but the master of the ship is the self. And the self is not in the cells, but the light of the self is reflected in the cells. The master of the self is not the thoughts, but the thoughts are enabled. That process of vrittis is enabled by the presence of the self. And so to know that I'm the self, this is my equipment, everything is, I am the master of the ship, because we often think we're not the master of the ship. We think we are servant of the ship. And so we are afraid of ourselves. We are afraid of our mind. We are afraid of our ego. So this reversal must take place. And then life becomes definitely more enjoyable, I would say.
And you have the last section, the part 3 of your book really talks about some of the tools to walk through to utilize this in the daily life.
Yeah, I mean, the last section is all about dharma. So the first part is about how we forgot who we are and how we gave away our power to that 7 steps of delusion in the mind, and our foraging senses in the world that are forever craving, and the mind that feels lonely, empty, forever not enough, The second section is about how we can reassert our mastery over our own senses, our own. We can make our ego work for us instead of being our enemy. We can make our mind and our intellectual process work for us. And it's all very simple, non-academic, with examples, with exercises, with meditation insights, so that as each chapter is read, one feels like, yeah, sure. If I don't eat that piece of cake, I'm not going to eat that piece of cake because I'm the master of my senses.
Yeah.
And people find amazing strength. But then in the third part, I wanted to talk about how to live with that strength and how it makes us kind and compassionate beings, powerful, non-violent, but powerful beings. Just because we are non-violent doesn't mean we'll roll over. And the Bhagavad Gita talks about how to even deal with conflict. And I talk about it. And the first way is in a win-win, happy way, no issues. The second one is, well, maybe you can be generous and, let it go. Sometimes we forgive someone. We give them a chance. And a third way is they're not listening. Then separate yourself. They're not worthy of your attention and time. And if they still don't leave you alone, and then the fourth one is show them. Show them what it means to mess with you. And I love it. This is so real. This is so practical because while we are souls, we are embodied souls and we're dealing with people's dark egos. So the Vedas doesn't turn us into these wimpy, fairy, sherry kind of people who are just sitting around waiting to be spiritually abused by our own guru, for God's sake. We just roll over and submit our entire boundaries to people. If it's not our boss abusing us, then it's our guru abusing us. This doesn't work.
Yes.
So I felt like I was also empowering people and waking them up from some mythological beliefs around spirituality. Maybe people don't like that about me because I am a strong woman. At the same time, I have my inner light, but I am representing that. I'm not going to sit there and be airy fairy and in the name of spirituality.
No, you are Durga. You are riding the tiger. You are riding the lion. Yes. And that is part, I think it's important to recognize that is part of traditional 10,000-year-old spirituality, that we ride tigers, we ride lions, that we go to war, that we confront, that we have boundaries and we hold them. But the difference that you write about in the book is that we don't do this with attachment. We don't pretend that
we're not doing this for the petty ego. We will only go to war as a last option, but that war will be for truth and light and dharma.
Yeah.
And not for our petty ego. No.
Yeah.
The Bhagavad Gita was, as a gospel, was spoken by Krishna to his disciple Arjuna. It happened in the middle of a war, but that war was needed. It was a war between dark and light, between untruth and truth, shadow and, reality. So these are all symbolic understandings, and it makes us a complete human being. You don't just bypass, wear a mala, grow some dreadlocks, check into an Indian ashram, and then decide, oh, you've become spiritual. This doesn't work. This is not real. And I think worldwide, people are now ready. I think like the intelligence quotient of humanity has increased a lot, and we don't need spiritual teachers and traditions to lie to us. We need the truth, and we're ready for it.
And then it's a matter of putting in the work into our daily life. Both, I love how you talk about both feeling the feelings and having the mental discipline, that the 5 senses are dogs that must be trained.
Yeah. The 5 senses, it's like taking 5 dogs for a walk. They need to they need to listen to us, and we'd want that.
Wonderful. Well, any final thoughts for our listeners today?
Well, I just enjoyed this conversation very much. And clearly from your questions, I can tell that you're an avid seeker. And so it's always, just delicious to talk to people who are enjoying this knowledge.
I could do an entire hour podcast with my gratitude for the Vedas, for the wisdom that Ayurveda and the Vedas and the spiritual teachings have given me insight and allowed me to find peace within the storm. That it's been the rock that I've been able to go back to. And it's very hard for me to describe in many ways because it's not a language. Sanskrit is not a language that's commonly used, and there's so many of the words that don't directly translate. But I think that those who know me, or maybe even those who listen to this podcast, have a sense of where it has allowed me to go in my life, and I will be forever grateful. I remember sitting in that first class with Dr. Ladd with my chin dropped to the ground, just thinking, "Are you serious? This is a thing?" And it's been with me ever since. So I'm very grateful. And I'm grateful also for our conversation today. Thank you so much. And your books and your podcast are such a gift. And I cannot wait for your book next January. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thank you for listening today with Acharya Shunya. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can get more information about her at her website, acharyashunya.com. That's spelled www.acharya.com, and about us at our website, centerforhealingneurology.com. Please be sure to share this show with your friends, and we welcome your rating and reviews wherever you get your podcasts, and feel free to send topic requests to podcasts@Center for Healing Neurology. We love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. We rise or fall together, and we are committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Partyfish Media.
Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org or realrentduwamish.org.